and welcome to Revolutionize Your Relationship. I am your host, Eva Blake, and in this series, I'm talking to a variety of experts who are uniquely qualified to educate and empower you to master your mind and body intimacy, to unleash your passion, and to create everything that you desire in life and in love, because you are absolutely worth it. So today, I'm really thrilled to introduce you to Kyle Benson. Kyle is a self-proclaimed relationship nerd who provides practical, research-based tools to build long-lasting, intimate relationships. He's best known for his compassion and non-judgmental style and his capacity to see the root of the problem. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm so glad that you could join us here. So I want to just start from your personal story. You came to this work out of your own personal breakdowns in relationships with yourself and with other people. So I'd love for you to just tell us about what happened. How did you get through it to be where you are now?
Yeah, it's the short story is I had three back-to-back relationships where I thought I was really into the person, the relationship was going well, and then they ended up cheating. And those were kind of, one relationship was like 3 years, another one 2 years, another one a little bit shorter than that. And it just, and like what I noticed too is like my body started having a lot of like reactions to that. And so what I did when I was feeling really insecure, like I've had this happen again and again, I'm clearly not good enough. Something's wrong with me. And so I started really kind of blaming myself for kind of what was going on in the relationship. And of course I had a role in those relationships. And they just were not really healthy. And I wasn't really authentic with what my needs were. I'd often like make sacrifices to really kind of get some form of connection. I was really anxiously attached. And so one of the ways I tried to cope with that was kind of work a ton. So I was working multiple jobs, trying to make as much money as possible because I figured if I had money, then maybe I would actually be attractive. And what ended up happening is I ended up getting really burnt out. And even though I was working a lot, I could not sleep. Like my anxiety was just crazy high and my body ended up reacting to that. And I had an autoimmune reaction, never had it before, but literally my psoriasis covered me kind of from head to toe. And you can kind of see a picture on my About Me page on my website that shows like just my back, but that like is my front, that's my legs, it's my head. And it really forced me to kind of go, how did I get here? Like I could not walk more than like half a mile without wanting to like faint. The doctor was like, you can't eat a lot of foods. We got to go really slow. And like I lost 30 pounds in a really short period of time as someone who used to be really active. And it just, I remember kind of sitting on the couch and going, how did I get here? What happened to my life that led me to this point? And even though I had all these health issues, where I went was with my relationships. And so I ended up reading a book called What Makes Love Last by Dr. John Gottman. And then another book called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, really talking about attachment theory. And so in trying to understand what went wrong, I started writing for myself. And then ended up sharing it with friends just because I thought it was cool. And then I somehow got those kind of published in like different publications. The Gottman Institute saw that I was writing about their research and they started kind of talking to me. I ended up working for their blog and running their blog for a bit. And so I was like immersed in this culture that was dedicated to understanding what makes a healthy relationship. And I got to read a bunch of stuff, nerd out. And actually, another thing I do in addition to kind of helping couples and individuals in relationships is I run research studies for the Gottman Institute's Love Lab team. And so, yeah, it's just been this kind of immersion in how do you make love healthy? And it really started from really unhealthy dynamics and painful experiences that kind of forced me to really kind of figure out where I missed things and how I could make it better.
Thanks for sharing that piece about your own personal story, especially the piece around the way that your body was just like screaming at you saying, hold up, dude, wait a minute. Like, we cannot go on like this any longer. And it's one of the places where I know when I'm working with my clients and even when I'm talking to friends that, you know, it's really common for people to disconnect from the messages that your body is sending you to say something in my life is not going well.
Mhm.
So I think that that's a really valuable piece. And you bring up the Gottmans, which I'm sure we can get to in a moment, because they really are the leaders and have been in this for a really long time. But you know, one of the things that they stand for, which is what you stand for, and I do too, is around intentionally intimate relationships. And
Mhm.
I'd love for you to just describe what is intentionality and what is intimacy, just to start with as a base level, because I want to get deeper into where can we do that in our relationships that we may be missing on a
Mhm.
regular basis.
Absolutely. So one of the things that's fascinating when you read research or even you go through it, often when we're dating someone in the early stages, we're pretty intentional, right? We're asking questions, we're getting dressed up, we're learning about them, we're responding to text messages, we're planning dinners, we're cooking dinners, we're planning adventures, right? We're pretty intentional. And often these
Mhm.
kind of feelings and this longing to get to know who the stranger is kind of drive that. And what we see in the research is that over time, right, couples who continue that kind of curiosity, continue that kind of intentionality, tend to have a stable and strong relationship, not
Mhm.
only with kind of the playfulness and emotional connection piece, but also with conflict, right? They're able to kind of really address things and talk about it, hear each other. And even though if there's not a solvable problem, they're able to find like a temporary compromise that honors both of them. And so, really, for me, intentional relationships is really kind of being intentional about kind of date night, being intentional about asking questions, building rituals of connection, being intentional about emotional intimacy as well as sexual intimacy, being intentional about conflict, right? One of the things around conflict is couples often wait till there's a spark that kind of triggers the conflict, and all of a sudden they got a forest fire. And one of the tools that I love to share with couples is
Yeah.
this Gottman approach called the State of the Union meeting, where you sit down, you talk about what's going well in the relationship, what you love about your partner, and then where you need to
Mhm.
improve. And it's kind of like instead of a spark that really bursts into flame and like causes this massive forest fire, it's like a bonfire that we get to kind of sit around and
Mm.
actually go deeper on and connect. Um,
Mm.
and so that to me is really kind of that intentional part of being proactive and deliberate in where's our relationship going.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's that part. And then in terms of intimacy, I use kind of a cheesy phrase called "into me, I let you see."
Yeah.
And that's often people think of intimacy as either sex or this kind of thing that's supposed to naturally come. It's just super easy. That's not been my experience. That's not been any of my clients' experience. It's a really scary, vulnerable thing, right? To have someone see all of us, have them see what we're about, and really get to know us at our core, even in the little ways,
Mhm.
is actually really scary. And that shows up outside the bedroom as well as inside the bedroom. And that's really what how I kind of view that.
Awesome. Thank you. You're going exactly in the direction that I want to go, right?
Mhm.
Which is the two places where I think that we're like, oh, we're going to just wait for the passionate moment or it's just going to emerge. We're going to be spontaneous is in the space of sex and conflict,
Mhm.
right? And I love this idea around how can we be intentional in both of these places that actually really set us up for actually being passionate in the moment. A lot of the people that I talk to are like, I want to avoid conflict and not get into it. And I don't want to plan sex because if I plan it, then it's not going to be spontaneous and it's not going to be fun. And so there's this real avoidance to be intimate or intentional in both of these places. So I'd like to dispel the myths around that to make it easier for all of us to get real with each other.
Yeah, and so we know too that a lot of people will avoid conflict, right? It's an approach to dealing with conflict. If you have two people who avoid conflict, that relationship can be healthy as long as there's a lot of positivity in those little conflict conversations they have, and they focus on their strengths. Often, though, the couples that I work with one partner is a conflict avoider, one partner is a conflict engager. And we get this kind of cycle where one pursues, one withdraws, and it happens again and again in
Yeah, yeah.
pretty much every facet of the relationship. And then sometimes, like for heterosexual couples, there's sometimes a switch. Then the male partner or the withdrawer might actually be more the pursuer sexually. And then the other partner is like, you don't engage me with conflict. Like, you're not actually present with me. So what I want to be with you here. And so while we often they kind of have a conflict or in sexual intimacy, they do really merge, right? Because if in conflict, it's really how we do it that determines how well it goes, right? How we talk about it. And that's one of the big things I really help my couples and clients work through is, how do I bring up stuff that's hard, right? Sometimes they're kind of poking each other like, you are so lazy. You never care about anything I care about. And I'm like,
Yeah.
as you do that, of course, your partner's going to shut down.
Yeah.
All they're hearing is how they're not enough and how they're the problem, which is what my avoidant clients feel like. I'm the problem, which is why I avoid the conflict. And so what we work on is having them be able to express those fears and have the partner who tends to pursue see that person actually can engage. But there's this history of these conflicts going really poorly with the person who they care about. Right. And so their avoidance is actually a strategy to protect the relationship. And what they always say, the people who avoid conflict, is, I don't want to make it worse.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we can get them to engage in conflict, we know that can start to really improve that. And the damaging thing is when they avoid conflict, often things get swept under the rug. They don't get dealt with. And we know that's a big predictor of divorce.
Yeah.
And so that's the same with intimacy, right? We have to be able to be a little bit more deliberate in our efforts to cultivate that, right? And sometimes that is scheduling a date night. Sometimes that is, right, going on a weekend trip together and having a hot tub at a hotel, or doing things that are playful and erotic and kind of dipping our toe into that kind of energy. And the fears around it not being spontaneous is when some of these things, when I hear people who say, well, that's not really spontaneous when you plan intimacy, is it's almost like they feel like they're following a recipe.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of it, right? It's sex is an adventure. It's a playground. And if this kind of schedule they have is what they stick to, right, that can still create a space where there's room to kind of play and explore and take our time exploring our partner's body, exploring what sensations are pleasurable, exploring what feels good in our body. And it really is kind of a mindset shift and an embodiment of our eroticism, even in that intentional space, that actually makes it valuable. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Of course, that makes sense. I'm a big fan of scheduling the sex day. Uh,
Mhm.
I said day. Some people say date. I say day, right?
Mhm.
Because, you know, there are often weeks where my Monday through Friday is completely full, and I'm giving a lot to other people, and I'm spending a lot of time in the Zoom room. And so at the end of the night, like, I don't have any more to give. I just want to, get undressed and go to bed and maybe like zone out with something and just relax, right? So 9 p.m. is like not an exceptional night to bring all of the arousal energy up. But Saturday morning at 9 a.m. after a cup of coffee in bed, and it's game on,
Mhm.
right? So I'm a big fan of that space where if we do create some structure, we can actually have a lot of freedom in that structure because we've both agreed to it.
Mhm.
Right. And I think some of the same thing about, as you were talking about conflict, this cycle of I'm going to come after you and you're going to run away. And I've totally been in that relationship. And it wasn't actually until we got out of the passion of the actual conflict and talked about, so what happens for you when we are in disagreement? Like, where do you go? Like, where does that come from? Where do I go? How do I behave? Where does that come from? And in many ways, it was really similar to the conversation around sex, which is what turns you on, what lifts you up, what turns you off, why do you want to leave the room, like why do you want to shut down. So I find that these two elements are really related when it comes
Absolutely.
to being in relationship with each other.
Mhm. No, and that's so spot on as they are. There are these, these kind of patterns of interaction, right? And again, there's so much that doesn't get talked about, right? A partner who doesn't initiate intimacy, right? There's fears around that. It's not going to be good enough. You're going to reject me. But that doesn't get talked about. That gets kept on the inside. Same with conflict. I avoid it because I'm going to feel like I'm the inadequate partner. That's a really shitty place to go.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about how we can make you not feel like that. And when you show up, the other partner can feel like, hey, I'm not the partner that no one wants to be with. Right. I'm the partner that they want to show up for. Right. And
Yeah.
it's really, again, and that's the how is how do we do this? Can we get vulnerable enough to share what's going on? Or do we just focus on the surface level of, right, I'm mad that you didn't fill the toilet paper roll.
Yeah.
Right. And like I have couples who have fought about toothpaste or like I've had fights about cat litter, right? Like
Uh-huh.
it's often not the topic, but it's
Mhm.
how and the emotional process that happens between us that really determines whether our relationship will get stronger or whether it will struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I really like that part around kind of intimacy of, oh, let's talk about it because a
Yeah.
lot of couples don't. And there's a lot of research that shows that it's almost this taboo. And when I'm talking with my couples and I start talking about erections, I start talking about really in detail, anatomy and arousal and desire, they're kind of like, how do
Where are we
we,
going? What's
yeah, what is
happening?
happening? Like, and because it's not normalized to actually talk about something that's a very normal human experience.
Yeah.
And so that's the other part too is there's a discomfort and an avoidance of really talking about this and really getting into our bodies and even for ourselves, right? Going into the bedroom or in the bathroom by ourselves and going, what would feel good for me here? Not just looking at the screen watching porn and masturbating to have an orgasm, but to
Yeah.
really understand what turns us on.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what feels good? What fantasies do I have? And
Yeah.
really starting to intentionally explore that rather than just react to kind of what our partner might do.
Yeah.
And that's also where that avoidance of not talking about it, they don't talk about what feels good. They don't talk about what doesn't feel good. And so partners are left guessing, going, okay, that was a sigh. Was that a good sigh or was that a bad
Yeah.
sigh? Right. And like then they're anxious and they're not as engaged in what's actually happening. And
Yeah.
that's why that communication and being clear about that, especially both in conflict as well as in intimacy, can be really powerful.
Yeah, beautiful. And really like at the heart of intimacy, I find is me being intimate with myself. If
Bingo.
I'm intimate with myself, if I know, as you were saying, what does turn me on? What do I like? How do I want to be touched? If I'm clear about that, then chances are that my level of anxiety has gone down a little bit in order to share it with my partner, in order to invite them in to be in relationship with me, rather than being in the moment and feeling like I don't know what to say right now, right? And like how how that can be really stressful. If I know beforehand, then when I can have a conversation at the dining room table about like what do I like in sex or what works for me when we're in conflict, right? The same I feel in so many ways it's the same conversation, just the subject matter is different, which is who am I, what's true for me, and how do I really want to be in relationship with you in moments where I'm either super turned on, right, or super scared,
Mhm.
right? And both of those are like high arousal moments in different kinds of arousal.
Right.
So I really love what you write about is really about, how we show up is how we're going to be in relationship. How we show up for self is how we're going to be in relationship. And this other piece that I'm picking up from what you're writing is like that we intentionally get to choose our relationships with
Bingo.
ourselves and with other people. And I'd love for you to talk more about that because I think a lot of us, maybe it's the old model now, or old model before online dating, where we're just scrolling, swiping left or right or whatever, which is we're just going to meet someone and we're just going to fall in love and it's going to be so great and the stars are going to align, right? But now we get to really choose. So I'd love for you to unpack that a bit for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to unpack with that. Really, in terms of kind of at a starting point, is we have to know what we need, what we want, and what is pleasurable, what's enjoyable, what's exciting, what's scary. We have to be attuned to that with ourselves, right? And it's from that place that then we get to kind of engage in these intimate relationships. If I don't know that I'm a huge cuddler And that's really important to me. But then I get really passive aggressive with my partner when they're not spending as much time with me. I'm not really intimate even with myself. I'm denying my needs, I'm denying my longings, and yet reacting to my kind of pain that I'm not even sure what it's about. Right. And so that's a really important step is, what do I long for? What do I wish for? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what Dr. John Gottman always says, he says, underneath every complaint, every criticism is a longing. There's a wish. And
Mm-hmm.
often people will say, here's what I don't want. I don't want you to come over and touch me. I don't want you, right? And the partner's like, well, what do you want? But they're feeling so defensive. And so I think that's really exploring of, what do I want? What do I want in a relationship? Do I want a partner who responds to text? Is that important to me? Some people can live in totally different states and have a really healthy relationship. Other people need to have someone who they're close with a lot more often, right? I love connection. I love closeness, and my partners and I spend a fair amount of time together, right? And we will text throughout the day. And that's something that is really true for me. Whereas in prior relationships, when I didn't own that, well, there'd be more conflict because I would
Yeah.
feel like I'm not valued, I'm not important. But because I didn't notice that, I would just kind of fight and get passive aggressive, and it was not healthy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
does that
Yeah,
resonate?
absolutely. And I'd love to just hone in on one thing that the Gottmans say, right? Which is it's the 69%, right? The unsolvable issues in our relationship that, this 69% of the time we're not going to have a solution for them. And when I heard about this, I was like, why am I in relationship then? Like what is happening, right? So, and at the same time, when I also heard it and I got to sit with it, I was like, okay, well then I don't have to freak out about every single thing. Right. So I'd love if you could put that into context for us when we're talking about that there are elements, even with somebody that we are so soulmate or aligned with, there are just going to be things that we're not going to work out with them. And how do we be okay with that and continue to develop intimacy and intentionality with this person?
Yeah. I mean, often I think a lot of people, we kind of wish we could date our clones in a way, but that also in a way is not fun. Right? There's a reason we chose our partner. And when you choose a partner, you also choose a set of problems, right? And that is that 69%. We know no matter who you choose, you're always going to have relationship issues. It's to what degree those relationship issues are tolerable, right? And how much you're willing to tolerate that and work with your partner. And so what we kind of know from the research is couples, when they have these differences, they often really fight and butt heads. My thing's way better. No, my thing's way better, right? And they don't actually build a bridge to these differences and say, okay, you're the spender, you're the saver. How can these two parts go out on the playground and play together? How can you understand why spending is so meaningful to me? It's a sense of having an adventure. It's a sense of being able to get things that I never had, because when I grew up, I didn't know what food I was going to have on the table, right? And the saver who goes, well, if we don't have money, I'm not going to be able to retire. I'm going to work for the rest of my life. There's a panic there, but they often don't go to those intimate parts, and they kind of fight over the dollars and cents.
Mhm.
And so like that's a pretty, in terms of that, that's where a lot of couples get stuck, is they get into kind of the details of the surface topic, not the emotions and what it means to them.
Yeah.
And that's the same with intimacy. I mean, there's partners who are like, hey, I want this certain type of sex. And other partner's like, that's not a part of my sexual health values. Like, that's not something my body is open to.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. What is that? Is there other things that this part of me that wants to explore can engage that honors my partner's sexual health values? Right. And get curious, rather than kind of put our foot down and either push harder or go other avenues that kind of betray the relationship. And that's the part about also being intimate, right? Can we own our desires, what turns us on, and bring them to our partner, even if those desires aren't acted on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Can we show
Absolutely.
up in that way? And that's a really vulnerable place. And often I do not see that with, particularly with relationships that I work with initially.
Mhm.
And when my clients do that, they often say that was one of the most erotic conversations we've had. And we talked about stuff that was arousing for me, and I know she can't do, right? Because she
Yeah.
has pelvic pain. So I know that's not something we can do right now. but I got to talk about it and she was there with me, right? And I got to share with him what's arousing for me and what turns me on. And even though it might not be something that's super exciting for him, he was still engaged. He was curious. He wanted to understand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that level of intimacy is super vulnerable, but it
Yeah.
also can lead to a deep, deep connection that is very rewarding and very meaningful.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm just, as you're talking, I'm thinking a lot about empathy, and when we share what I'm scared about, then hopefully, right, my partner is like, "Oh, I'm empathizing with you. I'm leaning into you now that I know what's going on underneath the surface." The same thing about fantasies. "Oh, now I know what's going on. Now I know you better." It may not be empathy, but maybe it is arousal, but I think part of all of that is like appreciation, like, "Oh, baby, you came forward, right? You really showed me who you
Mhm.
are." And I think that that's really what, brings us closer together. And as you were saying earlier about the this person pursues and this person runs away, like when we kind of break those cycles apart and understand them, right? Then our intimacy together, just our emotional connection, our emotional closeness, in
Mhm.
my experience, has made the sex better, has made the fighting, brings the temperature down in the fighting. I notice now for me, like, uh, there's a lot more laughing in the moments when we're in conflict. I want this thing, you want this thing. Now we can actually laugh about how silly we are when we do dig our heels in. I'm a flag planter. I'm like, I want you to do it my way.
Mhm.
And now that I'm in an emotionally intimate relationship, my partner can be like, "Oh, look, there you go again, doing that thing that you do." And
There's your flag. Right.
now we have joy, right?
Mhm.
Which takes us out of the red zone, you
Right.
know? And I think that that's super valuable. Thank you so much, Kyle. I love what you've brought here. I love that we can talk about sex and conflict in the same conversation and see the places where they are similar. And underneath all of that is intimacy with self creates
Mhm.
intimacy with other people, and not just our beloveds, right? But all the people in our life. When we are intimate with ourselves, we can create something really amazing with other people. So, Kyle, thank you so much for participating. Your wisdom is gems, real, pure gems. I am just so grateful. Thank you very much. And to all of the people who are watching, come back tomorrow because we're going to have another really juicy conversation.